Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another program here on Legally Speaking. As usual, I'm very happy to have you guys with me this evening, and we are going to be talking about estate planning this evening. Now, as I mentioned previously, in these next 4 videos, we're going to be looking at that. But just for today, we're going to look at what is estate planning, why it is important, who should do it, when they should do it, and we'll also throw in some extras. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope that this program will be beneficial to you in some way. Welcome back. So, let's start with our definitions. What is estate planning? Now, while we are here, we acquire stuff during our lifetime. Land, house, vehicles, you name it. We acquire stuff during our lifetime, and fortunately or unfortunately, we can't take those things with us when we die. So, estate planning is essentially determining what happens to your stuff after you die. Now, why is that important? That is important for 2 main reasons. Number 1, time, and number 2, money. You want to plan your estate in such a way that those who are coming after you can acquire your stuff in the least amount of time with the least amount of expense. And so if you don't plan properly, that process for them can end up being a very lengthy process, and it can also end up being a very expensive process. And so you want to avoid not planning or not planning properly to avoid that difficulty for those who are coming after you. So now you know what estate planning is generally, and you know why it is important. Let's talk now about who should do it. Now, estate planning, unfortunately, people assume that it's for old people, those who are critically ill or who are advanced in age. And so the thinking is, if it's almost time for you to die, then essentially you need to put your house in order before you kick the bucket. But we really want to move away from that kind of thinking, because especially in these times, life is very uncertain and nobody really knows precisely when they are going to die. Yes, most people would probably die in their old age, but you can die at any moment. So you want to ensure that even if you are young and healthy, you put a proper plan in place for the administration of your estate. And so to answer the question, who should do estate planning? The answer is very simple. As long as you have started accumulating or acquiring stuff, you should have a plan in place. So if you are perhaps in your 20s, 30s, you already have a vehicle, you already have property, you have a life insurance policy, you have shares, you have money in the bank, you already have these things, then you should be doing some form of estate planning. And so now that you know what is estate planning, why it is important, and who should be doing it, by now you have a good idea of when you should be doing it. And basically, you don't want to put this off as something to do sometime down the road. You want to approach it as a matter of urgency, especially if you have children or a spouse, so that they will be well taken care of after you pass on. And so if you fail to do estate planning or proper estate planning, the law has a procedure through which what you leave behind would be administered. And apart from the time and money savings, you want to ensure that what you have acquired during your lifetime passes on to the people who you actually want to inherit those things. And so if you fail to do that planning, the law would basically deal with that for you. and whoever the law outlines is entitled as a beneficiary, they would inherit whatever you leave behind. So there's the time saving factor, there's the expense saving factor, but there's also the freedom that you have to determine ahead of time who should inherit what you have acquired. And that is important for many reasons. And one of the main reasons would be to ensure that there is no conflict after you pass on. And this has become very typical in our Caribbean context, because a lot of contention, even in families that are together and united during the lifetime of a relative, when they pass on, sometimes conflict and confusion can arise over what has been left behind and who should inherit what. Now, if you make those plain even before your passing, it would cut down on some of that contention, some of that confusion. And as we go through these next 4 videos, we will look at what is called intestacy. Basically, you die without making a will, or you die without making a valid will, and we will go through how you go about making a valid will. And there's also circumstances where you have a will, but the will is not exhaustive. You have acquired certain property, but when you prepare that will, you did not give an account for all of the assets that you have acquired during your lifetime. And there was no clause that was included to capture everything in that will. And so we will go through some of those things. What is intestacy? We will go through making a deed of gift and what are the benefits of doing a deed of gift. What's the benefit of doing a will, the advantages and disadvantages of both options. And we will go through some of the other things that you can do to save your loved ones precious time and expense in the administration of your estate, and generally the procedure that they must follow to inherit what you have left behind. Now, what I have said so far was spoken from the perspective of the person who needs to do estate planning. It's also important for those of you who stand to be beneficiaries. You might have a spouse, you might have a parent. It's important for you to have these conversations with your loved ones before they pass on to ensure that your best interest is looked after. And so that is not to say that you're going to approach it from the perspective of you are fighting for stuff, because people tend not to have these very important conversations because they don't want to leave a bad impression. They don't want to make it seem as if they're fighting for stuff. They don't want to make it seem as if they're anticipating with great expectation the death of their loved one. But these conversations are very important for us to have, simply because of the serious consequences that could flow from a failure to effectively plan your estate. And so, as we go through these videos, we will go through these things step by step, and I truly hope that this mini-series would be of some use to you. And so next week, we will be looking at intestacy. What happens when you die without making a will? And of course, I'm very grateful to my sponsor, Be Well Pharmacy, for sponsoring these videos, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.